Are you stressed out? Have you ever been tired of being a human being? Have you ever wanted to be an inanimate object? Well, today is your chance. I'm going to be showing you how I turned myself into a marble statue today. And if you are as fed up with your daily life as I am, then I suggest you do the same. First, I'm just applying my foundation by Burt's Bees, and this is just so we have a clean base to start with. And yes, I'm applying this with my hands because I could not find my beauty blender like the hot mess I am. Then for the bulk of this look, I'm just using this simple palette by Snazzaroo. I added some water to the white paint, and here I'm just starting to add that to my face. At first, I decided to just kind of make sure that this was going on evenly in the same direction, and just slowly added it in. I wanted to make sure that it didn't look too patchy, but that there were some variations in the color like marble typically has. Once I had a good base of this down, I decided to just kind of blend that out and add a little bit more variation to it. Any parts that looked a little bit too patchy, I just went in horizontally to add a little bit more texture. On the parts of my face that were a little bit harder to paint, like my nose and lips, I just kind of dabbed that in as much as I could. Once my face was pretty covered, I was just making sure that I got all the edges and then continued it down to my neck. While I was applying this, I was continuously dipping into the white paint and water, but of course you want to make sure that it doesn't get too wet because that will make it a little bit more translucent and harder to build up. Then with the dry brush, I just added in some more of that white paint by dabbing it in and making this a little bit more opaque than the rest of the paint that I used so far. If you've ever painted something like marble before, you know that it has a lot of different textures and a lot of different layers to it, so it's very important to make sure that you build up a lot of those textures throughout the whole process. I decided to mix some of the white and black to make a light gray to start adding some contrast in with. I did this by just dabbing it in where I already decided I was going to put the veining in the marble later on, and just blending that out by just dabbing that brush around. Whenever it got a little too dark in some spots, I just made sure that my brush was wet so I could easily blend that into the white. I realized at this point that the paint wasn't covering my eyebrows at all and would not cover my hair at all. So I decided to go in with this white eyelash primer, and I just kind of dabbed that into my eyebrows and just went through the eyebrow hairs to make sure that that was blended into my face as much as possible and as flat as it possibly could be. I ended up adding that to my eyelashes as well because I wanted this look to be very consistent so the illusion would work properly. I then ended up going in with some more white paint, and I just dabbed that in for more variations and texture throughout the marble. So then I decided to add in some veining, but first I needed to make sure that my brush was very dry so we got a very clean look for this. And then with the black face paint, I'm just adding in that veining where I would like it to be. And I'm not too worried about it being too dark at this point because I can easily fade it out with some water. So once I had a lot of veining on my face, I just went in with a wet brush and just kind of dabbed that throughout. And since this was the first layer of the veining, I wanted to make sure that this layer was pretty faded. Once I had that faded throughout, I just went in with a dry brush and added in some more white paint in just some parts of my face to build up that contrast again. I did this by just lightly dabbing throughout my face and adding some highlights where I wanted them. Then with some black face paint, I just ended up painting the rest of my neck and a little further down, and this was to create kind of a bust illusion, which is a type of statue that's just from the shoulders up. And I ended up using black paint for the base instead of white paint down here, just to add a little bit more variation. So if you look at marble, you can see that it typically has a lot of variation between the colors and kind of fades from one to the other. So I thought that that would help add a little bit more contrast and texture throughout. I did end up wiping away some of the black paint just to add a little bit more highlight. And I just did this with a wet sponge. I just added some white paint to that for some variation. With the black face paint, I just decided to create kind of the ending of the bust, if you will, and just make a black base for that. And once my face was completely dry, I just went back in with that veining, and I just continued that down to my neck and shoulders as well. And I went in pretty lightly at some parts just to add a little bit more variation throughout this. I really wanted to make sure that we had a lot of texture throughout this, a lot of color variation throughout as well, so that we could look as much like marble as possible. And I did keep my brush pretty wet for this, and then going in with some more water, I just dabbed that out from the veining and blended that in to build up some more contrast. This of course looks a little bit crazy right now, but this is all going to be a little bit more blended in and have more layers put on top of it. So that's slowly just being blended in. Now I'm just making sure that my brush is wet and that I am fixing any mistakes as I go. How I approach face paint is kind of how I approach watercolor paints. In which there's a lot of layers and it really does take a while to build up for me. Once that looked a little bit more like marble and a little bit more blended, I just went back in with that veining. For this layer of veining, I used it a little bit more sparingly and made sure that I wasn't too heavy because this is one of the last layers to this. I did notice that in some parts of this it got a little bit too blended, so I ended up just dipping my fingers into some of that white face paint and dabbing that in to build up that texture a little bit more. And add some lighter colors to where it got a little bit too dark. I then realized that I'm an idiot and I did not paint my ears at all. So I quickly tried to fix that with some white paint, the gray, and the black, and just mix that into my ears and hairline. I ended up using my eyelash primer again and just put that throughout my hair. And I really just watched where the highlights on my face were and blended it out from there. Once I had a good amount of that in my hair, I just went in with some white face paint and just added that in to add a little bit more highlight and make it match my face a little more. And now, after about an hour of me adding these layers to my face and hair, we have the finished look. I hope you guys liked how this turned out. Honestly, I'm pretty proud of myself. I'm still very new at using face paint, and for a beginner, I think this looks pretty good. I have a lot of ideas for future looks with face paint, so stay tuned for that and for other artsy things as well. I hope you guys liked hanging out with me today, and I typically post videos on Sunday and or Wednesday, so if you'd like to see more content, then please hit subscribe. And yeah, bye guys, see you later. Problems in the burbs, can't find my parents' house now. They're all looking the same way, all those Veer Bradley fake smiles. There's some problems in the suburbs. suburbs with the suicidal